This is the second request video I've received, and this was requested by a gentleman going by the name of Mr. World Guy, and he wanted me to cover the topic of Brazil with respect to men. Now, this is not normally a topic I would cover, but he donated, and so I will cover it. But before I proceed, I want to make abundantly clear that one thing we should always bear in mind when we talk about women and men from X country is that women and men are universally the same in their basic instincts and drives. All deviations in individuals to the contrary notwithstanding, you will always be able to observe a common pattern. And this common pattern will be buffered or mitigated by whatever cultural norms or cultural standards might be in place in the respective country or area. But they're playing with the same variables. That is to say, culture is a force which mitigates, increases, modifies the already present biological factors in men and women. It doesn't completely change them. In fact, it doesn't really change them at all. It modifies them. Change has a context of completeness, right? To change from one thing to another is to imply that one thing it becomes something else entirely, whereas modification also implies implicitly that it's still the same thing, but it's modified, such as putting an antenna on a piece of electronic equipment or whatever. So whatever I talk about now, we're talking about perhaps specific modifications to the inherently present traits in men and women in Brazil. Now, Brazil, as many of you know, has been undergoing rapid industrialization in the last 2 decades. It's always had a pretty strict division of classes in terms of socioeconomic status, with really the small amount of people being rich and many being poor. And, a lot of CIA interventions and American foreign interventionism in such Operation Condor and what have you, I think it was in 1964 to be specific. There's always been a lot of American interference in Brazil up until fairly recently. It's only been, I'd say, in the last 2 decades that economically Brazil has been able to crawl out from under the drainage pipe. And as a consequence, there's been more economic equity, and there's a growing middle class. Now, divorce as a concept was legalized in the 1970s, I believe 1977. And as can be expected, things in Brazil don't really operate all that differently to other places. Whilst I don't see any evidence based on the research I've done to suggest that the institutionalized alimony machine that we see present in the Anglo-Saxon communities, or countries, rather, is as robust as there. And it's not as robust as in the United States, Canada, Australia, UK. It's certainly present. So let me read off 2 articles, and I will discuss their contents. This is a bit old, but Brazilian divorces surged by 46%. Legislation of no-fault divorce leads to 350,000 couples splitting in the year since 2010 in world's most populous Catholic country. The number of Brazilians divorcing has reached a record high, according to the country's IBGE statistics agency. It said on Monday that there were more than 350,000 divorces last year, 46% more than in 2010, after Brazil's Congress made it quicker and easier to divorce in the most populous Catholic nation on earth. Before 2010, Brazilians had to be separated with a judge's approval for a year before they could seek a divorce. But after an amendment to the country's constitution in 2010, such a separation no longer became necessary. The agency said that it prompted the record number of divorces. This has been monitored in Brazil since 1984. Currently, as long as there is agreement between the divorcees and there are no underage children or incapable persons involved, a divorce may be performed by a notary. Divorce only became legal in Brazil in 1977. I was correct about that off the top of my head. Another interesting little snippet. Alimony debt man held in Brazil. A Kent academic is being held in jail in Brazil for not paying child support, according to his family. Now, Kent's an area in the UK. He worked at the university there. Martin Boyle, who is an English lecturer at the University of Kent, was arrested when he arrived in Sao Paulo at the weekend. His father, Peter, said he was being held in the city on suspicion of not paying the equivalent of 2,500 sterling in child support payments. The Foreign Office confirmed that Mr. Boyle was in prison in Sao Paulo. Very unpleasant is the headline. Mr. Boyle said his son was currently in an access battle with his Brazilian ex-wife and had traveled to the city to see if he could see his 16-year-old daughter. He said he received a text over the weekend which said, "Going into prison now, have to leave mobile with lawyer. Don't know how long I will be there." Family and friends think Mr. Boyle's outstanding alimony payment of 6,000 Brazilian real, about 2,500 sterling, is an oversight. Mr. Boyle's friend Jane Myers said she hoped some good would come of the situation. She added, quote, "I do believe that at least now some light will have been put on the situation and maybe it might help him, even though it is very unpleasant, I'm sure, at this point in time. At least now perhaps he might go a little bit further to perhaps having some access or at least trying to sort something out." So that's the end of the article. So yes, foreigners can be put in jail for remiss alimony payments in Brazil. Yeah, it's not as robust as the Anglo-Saxon system, but you can still easily get fucked. Now, Mr. World guy who wanted me to do this topic, he says that he finds Brazil interesting. Now, I find Brazil interesting too, mostly for the biodiversity. I mean, the Amazon rainforest has more biodiversity than any place on the planet. Or is it perhaps because of the Portuguese language? I don't know. When you say you find it interesting, I'm not sure what you mean. Now, we all know that advice is the worst vice. That is to say, all advice is really just a vice. No pun intended, advice, vice. And here is some unsolicited advice. This is not the first time I've received either message or requests along these lines, and I'm often puzzled. If you're going your own way, I can understand your interest for the sake of statistically supporting arguments you make in favor of not getting married, but why would any individual be interested in a particular aspect of a country with respect to divorce? I mean, how bad is it for men? Well, it's pitiable and unfortunate for these men who get married, say in Brazil or any other country. But since you're going your own way and never going to get married in the first place, you don't need to worry about this stuff. It's completely irrelevant to us in the sense that it doesn't affect us directly. Although, certainly, in showing compassion and being aware of our fellow men's plight, we want to make them aware of this. But whether it's Brazil or South Korea or China or Argentina or whatever, I don't see a reason for being all that interested in this aspect of Brazil. On the other hand, if you were to say, I'm interested in the biodiversity of the Amazonian rainforest, totally on the same page with you. Portuguese is an exceptionally interesting Romance language because it preserves various archaic features of Latin that are not present in most other Romance languages. Interesting pronunciation as well. And Brazil itself, booming economy. There's reason to take economic interest in Brazil. But to be interested in divorce, I'm concerned for you, sir. I'd say that much. I'm worried that you might be looking for that special someone who might be in Brazil. But don't be fooled by your instincts or your desires here. This is the same instinct or desire that some men have of escaping to Thailand or Japan or China or whatever. Women and men are universally the same across the globe. Men are men and women are women. Culture mitigates or increases certain tendencies and modifies whatever is already present. But since you're going your own way, you don't need to worry about any of this stuff. It's not applicable to you. And I see this often enough that it does raise the question for me why all these men are interested in what the divorce rates are, unless you're trying to present arguments for the statistical relevance of not getting married, which is a very, very sound endeavor. We all want data that are going to back up the arguments we make. But quite frankly, It's almost as bad in Brazil as we could see from the the rising divorce rates as it is everywhere else. And this is the mechanization effect. This is the loosening of the legal procedures with regards to divorce, and women are going to be women and men are going to be men. But you, as a man going your own way, you're different because you're aware of these things. You know it's a raw deal. You know it's a raw deal, be it in the States, be it in Spain, be it in the UK, be it in South Korea, be it in Brazil. It's not all the same in the dirty details, but the end result is the same. You'll lose a lot of money, you'll be miserable, and in the case of this poor schmuck from Kent in the UK, you might get thrown in jail for not paying your child support payments. This should be a lesson to all of us, this inquiry. I mean, this whole idea of, I've said this many times, I'll reinforce what I've said before, going abroad for the sake of finding a woman who's going to be quote unquote different from some Western woman, you are deluding yourself to think that she might be different. And the minute you switch the environment, whatever constraints she was in that previous environment will be turned off. They will be rather thrown off completely. You've seen this time and again. There was that issue of the Canadian man dealing with his Thai wife, and she got married to him, and da-da-da. This is almost universal. If, however, you as an individual, I'm not necessarily talking about you, Mr. World Guy, but anyone out there, if you feel that you absolutely have to get married, this is some dream for you, I would recommend the Philippines. Divorce is illegal. It's the only country that I'm aware of where divorce is completely illegal. And so you're guaranteed not to get a divorce, which means you yourself will forever be trapped in the marriage, and your female spouse will be too. Brazil is not the case, despite being very Catholic since 1977. And so if you want to get married, make sure to go to the Philippines. But I wouldn't recommend you getting married. I wouldn't recommend you pursuing a relationship. But then again, the worst vice is advice. So there you go. I hope that clarifies, at least in part, the situation of men in Brazil. But it's important to not look at these little niggling details and look at the bigger picture. Men are men and women are women, and there's not going to be all that much variation across countries. You'll see slight variation in the cultural influence, but the baseline remains the same. We're talking about modification, not change, not transformation, modification. Okay, I hope that more or less covers your question. And thanks for your donation, and have a pleasant, whatever your time zone might be, day, night, evening, etc. Everyone take care. Bye-bye.